So has Haarken World Claimer's enormous Chaos Armada managed to seize control of the Nachmund Gauntlet or not? Let's talk about Warhammer 40K's latest big lore update, the outcome of the next current timeline conflicts, and what hints there might be for the future. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought I'd cover the latest developments in Warhammer 40k lore, this one coming from the recent Crusade book. Some of the lore stories that Games Workshop come out with in the current setting might have a bit more impact on the overall galaxy than others, and I feel like this is one of them. And it's basically Games Workshop's latest update on a narrative that they've had going for really quite some time now, the entire Vigilus and Nachmund Gauntlet war, that they've cycled back to a couple of times with different narrative expansions in the past. It's always interesting when they actually update the current timeline and things that are happening in the galaxy at the cutting edge of 40k lore, particularly given that they often tend to do these cycles kind of slowly and seem to have a coherent enough picture that they drop hints and plot lines going a long way forward into the future. The area of space being fought over in this book is the Nachmund Gauntlet. It's kind of close to the Eye of Terra and is one of the only stable passageways through the Great Cicatrix Maledictum, the great big rift that opened up after the Cadian Gate fell, separating the Central Imperium Sanctus from the Imperium Nihilus. I'll quickly recap the lore events that have led up to this and then the outcome of the fighting in this book. The geography of the rift itself basically has the world of Vigilus on the northern side of it, where most of the fighting has been taking place so far, then a whole string of worlds along the passageway, one of them being the night world of Daravar, and then on the southern tip is the Imperial fortress world of Sangua Terra, a strong point to hold back the forces of Chaos. Control of one of the main crossing points from the Imperium Nihilus to the Imperium Sanctus will be really valuable, in particular for the Imperium, who otherwise can't really reinforce great swaths of their territory. As mentioned, the lore so far is mainly focused on Vigilus at the northern end of the Gauntlet, a great big Imperial fortress and bastion world with a number of hive cities, and notably scarce in water, which is a big resource there that they have to fight for. Vigilus does seem to have had its share of problems, being beset by a good number of Xenos foes in the War of Beasts, Orc speed freaks having taken a good number of the deserts in between the hive cities and only kept back with huge force shields, and in the meantime containing themselves to holding big races in the deserts and looting anything that does happen to set out beyond the great big fortresses. The rift opening caused a number of the force shields to fail, and some cunning Orc commandos infiltrated the generators of another hive and took them down. With the Orcs in the ascendancy, the gene-stealer cults of the Pauper Princes also declared a great uprising, taking one of the hives for themselves and seizing one of the planet's great water reserves, and Samehan Eldar made planetfall as well, assassinating a Chaos cult leader, but wound up in conflicts from the Imperium as well, mistaking them for Drukhari raiders and attacking them and killing their autarch. Ultimately, the planet wasn't in a great state, and Marni's Calgar, guided by Targerius, arrived at the planet to marshal the defences, given that it was seen as an absolutely vital world that on no account could be allowed to fall. A great number of the best-known Space Marine chapters took up the fight, and in general slowly began to wrest control of the planet from the big threats, though there was still a massive amount of forces of both Gene-Stealer cults and the Orcs in particular. Then Haarken World Claimer, the Herald of Abaddon the Despoiler, makes planetfall. His thing is to drive his spear into the ground and claim the worlds for the Despoiler, and along with him he brought a great Chaos fleet, many of which assailed Imperial vessels with boarding actions with demon summonings, and Abaddon's primary flagship, the Vengeful Spirit itself, was able to reach the planet. As a result, there was an enormous multifaceted war, primarily the Imperium versus Chaos, but also a good amount of collateral fighting with the Orcs and Gene-Stealer cults. These both took heavy tolls on the Chaos forces, though in the face of a greater foe, Calgar was able to negotiate a pact with the Eldari, seemingly giving the Xenos justice with their vengeance on some of the Imperial commanders who first ordered the attacks upon them. The Eldari helped to trigger conflicts between Orcs and Chaos, depleting both sides and giving the Orcs a good fight. Marnis Calgar himself engaged in combat against Abaddon the Despoiler, Calgar managing to break Abaddon's jaw and Abaddon severing off two of Calgar's fingers and puncturing his secondary heart, putting him out of action, though Abaddon was forced to withdraw to the Vengeful Spirit, which had taken horrendous damage and he didn't want to be trapped planetside, and of course the possessed minions that he left to finish the job weren't enough to even down an injured Calgar. It did mean that the Ultramarines chapter master had to take a back seat though, and many feared that he'd been slain and was a big blow to Imperial morale. With Abaddon's withdrawal though, Inquisitor Cartavolnus and Saint Celestine rallied the Imperial forces on Vigilus and largely managed to drive most Chaos Orcs and Gene-Stealer cults from the planet's surface, broadly winning the day for the Imperium on the planet itself, though in the meantime basically the rest of the Chaos fleet had ravaged the entire sector pretty much, leaving Vigilus standing all by itself, the Imperium holding one important world, but perhaps of lesser value all on its own. After the events of this, Haarken Worldclaimer marshalled his great fleet, but rather than striking for Vigilus, decided to progress the other way along the gauntlet. There was a great battle at the Chaos Knight world of Daravar, where a huge amount of Imperial forces had mustered and some had fled to, and after brutal fighting and a great big counterattack from Haarken Worldclaimer, this was a resounding Chaos victory, and the twisted nobles of the Chaos Knight world joined Haarken's cause. As response to the enormous fleets heading south down the gauntlet, the Imperium hastily moved to further fortify Sangua Terra and the Sanctus wall systems, turning these as rapidly as possible into a great big fortress world, and between Sangua Terra and the outlying systems, these were aimed to hold back the forces of Chaos, and there was a wide array of Imperial forces gathered there, including remnants of the chapters of the Wardens of the Gauntlet, chapters that used to be present in the area but often had taken some massive damage in the previous fighting, so many were far from full strength. Following his victory on Daravar, Haarken's fleets continued down the gauntlet, and was engaged in a big space battle with Lord Admiral Priska, the battle dealing a decent amount of damage to the Chaos fleet, but was ultimately brushed aside, and several of the Imperial vessels were even captured by boarding actions from Chaos, and this further meant that the Imperium were very unlikely to be able to win the space battles around the planets. That's basically the big setup for the Nachmund Gauntlet war so far, and then the lore update from the new book basically details Haarken's assault on Sangua Terra itself. Sangua Terra is one of the 4 major systems in the war, but the biggest and most central linchpin one, and the concern from the Imperium is that if it falls, then a major obstacle gets removed from Chaos being able to push forward towards Holy Terror itself, and the book goes into some good details as to the Imperial defenders on the world. The principal defenders-in-chief seem to be the Sisters of Battle under Junitha Rita of the Order of Our Martyr Lady, great formations of warrior nuns in power armour deployed under her command and reinforced by the living Saint Celestine, who I believe was lost once more on Vigilus, but unsurprisingly she's still alive. And there's also the Inquisitor Erasmus Cartavolnus present as well, who was instrumental in retaking Vigilus. Otherwise, for the Space Marine defenders, perhaps the most notable are a big contingent of the Guardians of the Covenant chapter. They're a Dark Angel successor and were fighting under Master Nardeth here, a Space Marine chapter particularly famed for its military knowledge, and otherwise present on the planet are a bunch of Ultramarines, Sons of Medusa, a good number of other Space Marine chapters, a vast array of different Knight households, plus some Titans of Legion Tempestor, plus massive amounts of Guard infantry to hold the line, primarily Cadians and Kriegsmen. Arrayed against them are a vast number of Chaos, and Abaddon's given Haarken Worldclaimer the Planet Killer ship, and this one's an enormous Chaos flagship that served as Abaddon's vessel in the 13th Black Crusade, a ship of uncertain origin believed to have been unable to have been built in real space, and resembling nothing like the vast majority of vessels crewed by the Imperium. The ship's design is all built around a central energy weapon of absolutely spectacular proportions. The Imperium doesn't entirely know exactly how it generates enough power to fire it, and as its name would suggest, when it's fired to max capacity, it can bore chunks out of planets themselves, causing enough upheaval to potentially destabilize their orbits and wipe life from them. Abaddon used it to destroy many planets during the Black Crusades, but generally tended to do so when he had no other choice and it was the best strategic option, preferring to capture worlds intact if it would better help his cause. I believe at least some previous lore had this potentially lost after Abaddon dedicated its commands to one of its subordinates, but it seems that it's very much alive and well. Otherwise, for the Chaos forces, the aggressors are primarily Black Legion and Light Lords in good numbers. I guess that was kind of implied by the Raptors jumping in on the front cover, using many different ways to get planetside, between different landing craft, teleport arrays and Dreadclaw drop pods being mentioned as well. Haarken leads his own personal forces in the Gloom Talons, a Black Legion force that's mainly Raptors and Warp Talons, maybe with some Helldrake support, though again there's a lot of other more minor forces of Chaos Space Marines of various different legions and warbands. Ahead of the main fleet, a good bunch of other Chaos were deployed, various cultists sent to infiltrate the planet and spread discord. There's a specific quote mentioning World Eaters kill teams, which is interesting enough. They might be using it just to have small forces after specific objectives. It would be kind of cool if the Khorne Berserkers got a kill team upgrade sprue. Otherwise, the other biggest element of their forces are the Chaos Knights of House Mandracore, the Knights of Daravar, making up a good bit of the strength of the Chaos forces. For the actual lore of the battle, it maybe feels like it's a little bit limited in terms of there being that many big blows back and forth, more sort of an endless chaos wave that just pours out of the sky. The Void Battle is commenced by a good number of Imperial ships within the first wave of attacks, captured things from the previous naval engagement, and these are used to sow a bunch of discord as it's not immediately clear that they're Chaos, and this helps the Chaos fleets gain further advantages that it doesn't really sound like they needed too much in terms of numbers. This allows Chaos to pour unchecked onto the planet, using their drop pods, landing craft, and raptors screaming down from the skies to make their descent and hit the Loyalists. Haarken's Gloom Talons engage against Celestine and the vast formations of Sisters of Battle, cutting brutal swaths in their formations, and Master Nardest's forces of the Guardians of the Covenant fight heroically but are ultimately driven back as well. It basically seems that between the Chaos Space Marines and their Knight allies, there's just too much force and too many numbers for the Loyalists to possibly cope with, and despite taking a heavy toll on the Chaos forces as normal, they're basically forced to retreat and head to their landing zones, evacuating to get at least some of their forces off-world. Some of the Legio Tempestor Titans get cut off from the evacuation sites, and one Warlord Titan is forced to detonate its own power core when under assault from a Bloodthirster. The cataclysmic explosion, banishing the demon and punching a massive hole in the oncoming Chaos forces, but it's clear that the battle is lost for the Loyalists. Celestine herself fights the rearguard and is on the very last gunship to leave. Ultimately, this one basically sounds like it's a massive Chaos victory. Sangua Terra is now in Chaos hands, and the Black Legion seem to have achieved their objectives, taking those worlds, and it sounds like Abaddon's plan is to make them into a staging post for further invasions to be able to springboard off. I'm sure there's more Imperial forces on the southern end of the gauntlet in the Imperium Sanctus, though on the northern end it sounds like Vigilus is basically standing kind of alone. And while the action of the book doesn't really focus on the fate of Vigilus, Abaddon the Despoiler basically seems to think that he's got Vigilus completely within his grip now, stating that nothing can stop Vigilus's fall, no relief force can reach it, it is mine. I'm not sure if this is setting the stage for yet another round of fighting on Vigilus itself, either some sort of heroic last stand, or it being finally under Chaos control. As the prelude to another great battle, I guess we'll find out on that front. It sounded like Rabute Gilliman had been generally planning to send Crusades off into the Imperium Nihilus and reinforce a bunch of worlds that desperately needed it, and it does sound like the Imperial forces have access to another stable crossing across the Great Rift in the Attilan Gate further to the galactic southeast. It sounds like he's a bit of a busy man at the moment though. He's certainly got Tyranid problems going on from the whole Leviathan story, with a great onslaught of them from the galactic west. And I believe that the Pariah Nexus Crusade story basically had Gilliman en route to the Pariah Nexus himself after the great big battle between Cole's forces and the Necrons, and now Vashtor showing up to join the fray as well. Feels like that's quite a lot to deal with for one Primarch, unless say Lionel Johnson and the Dark Angels get involved from the Imperium Nihilus, potentially with Dante as well. In any case though, let me know what you make of the Chaos victory. Let me know where you think that they'll take the plot from here. I'm curious as to what happens to Vigilus now, given that that was quite such a focus point in previous battles. Will Abaddon just be able to seize and take that now it's standing all by itself? Or will we see some Imperial forces stand up to challenge him? Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more videos like this. I'll certainly keep the news and updates coming, maybe more focused about miniatures and gameplay, though I do find it interesting when Games Workshop updates the core 40k lore as well. Finally, if you've been enjoying the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well. You can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep these coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.